If you know anything about me, you'll know just how much I like computers. And whenever I have the budget, I'm always looking at getting more GPUs, more compute, more storage, more. And my hope is always that new hardware allows me to be more productive and allows me to complete my projects faster. But in the end, I've ended up with this mess of computers that is a complete nightmare to manage. What if the solution I'm looking for isn't more, but actually less? Much less. This is the M8 mini PC by GMKTec, and it might just be the solution I'm looking for. Now, it's not going to be able to simulate millions of particles as fast as this Blender simulation machine, and it's not going to be able to train enormous machine learning models as fast as this NVIDIA GPU. But what if these things aren't weaknesses and they're actually the best thing about this? Before we dive in, a huge thank you to GMKTec for sending me this machine. No money changed hands, and I can say whatever I want about this. They don't get to see the video before you do. There are lots of reasons that I need incredibly powerful computers. So for the Blender videos on my channel, I need incredibly fast CPUs to run those simulations and incredibly fast GPUs to render them. And when it comes to my day job, I'm a senior research fellow at University College London, where I'm working in medical AI research, which needs all the GPUs in the world. I could have every GPU in the world and I could always need more GPU. So what's the problem that this could solve? Well, the problem is that I've ended up with too many computers. At home, I have two powerful desktops that are focused on Blender, and at work, I have maybe 4 desktops on top of compute within our compute cluster that has powerful GPUs that we can send jobs to. And the problem is managing all of these things. My previous solution to managing so many computers at once has been my iPad. I have an iPad Pro with keyboard, and I use Rust Desk to remote into whatever computer I want to control, do whatever I want, and then disconnect. But this has so many problems. So for one, the screen is small and the aspect ratio is different from these computers, which means that often I'm squinting, I have to hold it up right to my face just to be able to read what's on these computers, and I can't really expand it to a second display. So iPad does support 2 displays, but the support is limited. For example, I can't have 2 instances of Rust Desk open with different computers, and I can't have 2 instances of Rust Desk which are one computer but both monitors on it. I can't connect to 2 computers at once, even if I did have the screen size. And passing in keyboard shortcuts is a complete nightmare. So there are some shortcuts which you can physically press, but they don't get passed through properly. Copy and paste is a whole thing. Depending on the iPad you might not even have an escape key. You need to be hitting escape quite often when you're remoted into other machines. And this is the problem that I thought the GMKTec M8 could solve. I thought it could be this mission control that I sit at every day, and I use it to log into as many machines as I want, to coordinate all of this work, and to allow me to have like a much better top level view of what everything is doing. And as it turns out, not only can it act as an incredibly good mission control, orders of magnitude better than my iPad, but it can do other things which an iPad obviously can't, which we'll get into. So we'll start with a quick unboxing, then I'll talk you through how easy it is to take this thing apart and add a second SSD, even given its tiny size. Then we'll talk about 5 killer use cases that I found for it. I'll compare it to the Mac Mini, which I think is a really natural comparison. And to end with, I'll tell you my favorite thing and my least favorite thing about this machine. So let's quickly unbox this thing, have a look at it from the outside. The box that it comes in is minimal, but really elegant and like perfectly sufficient. The machine comes inside. You also get some leaflets and this power brick. It's funny looking at the power brick compared to the machine. It's longer. It feels like almost the same size as the machine itself. It's not because the brick is particularly big, but it's because the M8 is just so tiny, like it fits in the palm of my hand. On the front, you have a great set of ports. So you have Oculink, meaning you can plug in external GPUs and get a blazing fast connection to that. I believe there are also some Oculink storage solutions that could be enticing. You also get a USB 4, USB-C port, 2 USB-A ports, a mic jack, and the front also has a power button. And then on the back, you'll see 2 more USB-A ports. The top is USB 3 and the bottom one here is USB 2. That's the gray one. But in total, 3 of the 4 USB-A ports are USB 3 that can do 10 gigabit. The back also has 2.5 gig Ethernet ports, and it has a display port and an HDMI port. The power port, and there's also a security lock port. And overall, this is a really well-balanced set of ports. And what I found is that whenever I've needed one more port, it's always been there. So I'm using the 2 USBs on the front. I sometimes use the USB-C on the front, and on the back, I wanted to use this with 2 monitors, and it's really handy having the 2 display outputs ready to go. So I have one going to one monitor and the other port going to another monitor. And when I first looked at this thing, I thought there's no chance there's a second SSD slot. Why would there be a second SSD slot? And I almost didn't even Google it because I took it for granted that, okay, maybe one SSD will be replaceable, but I thought there's no chance that you can add a second SSD. But I did Google it, and I'm so glad that I did, because it turns out this thing comes with one SSD populated, but there's a second M.2 slot that is empty, and you can add a second SSD to it. The teardown, if you just want to access the SSD, is really easy, and I actually figured it out without having a video as reference. I kind of figured it out as I went along. So I really like this design feature. The feet on the bottom of it are actually screws that are holding the inside of the machine to the chassis on the outside. You can unscrew these 4 feet, and it allows the metal clamshell thing to come off, revealing just the PC on the inside. Then all you have to do is remove these 4 screws. You don't have to remove this screw on the other side. That confused me for some reason. I took it out even though I didn't have to. But you just have to remove these 4 screws in the corner, then carefully lift up the fan. Be mindful of the ribbon cable that's connected on one side. And look at that. There's a whole M.2 slot available, so you can add a second SSD. I can't believe that they've managed to do this within this footprint. There's a screw pre-installed, so you just remove it, put it back in, you're good to go. You can boot the machine and it sees this second SSD, and the speeds from it are really good. So I used this to offload some data from this SSD to my NAS, and it was saturating the 2.5 gig Ethernet connection. So that's one of the use cases that I found for this mini PC. The network connection is more than fast enough that I found myself using it multiple times to get data onto my NAS, just because these other machines are further away and this is at my desk within arm's reach. So that was use case number 1 out of 5. But what about the reason I got this, which was to act as a mission control to coordinate all of the various computers that I use? How does it perform there? And it performs incredibly well. Well, the first way that I did this is using RustDesk, which is what I was using on my iPad. But on this thing, it is so much better, and it solves every problem with the iPad version of RustDesk. So I can use it on 2 monitors. I can have as many RustDesk connections live at the same time as I want. I can remote into another computer that has dual monitors and have each of my monitors here remote connected to one of the remote monitors on the other machine. The screens are much bigger and they're 16:9, meaning it's really easy to read what's on the screen. And finally, keyboard shortcuts pass through really well, so it solves that problem. I can even hit weird keyboard shortcuts like Command backtick to a Mac, which I really like as a keyboard shortcut. It cycles through windows of the same application. There's only one downside that I found, and this is not a shortcoming of the PC, it's just a difference between RustDesk on a computer versus iPad. I like dictating, and on iPad, you can actually get the iPad to dictate text to the remote PC. On Windows, on the desktop installation of RustDesk, you can't do that directly. I have to dictate into a notepad or something and copy and paste the text to the remote machine. But that said, copy and paste is much better on desktop versus iPad, obviously. So what about use case number 3? This is actually another coordination kind of use case, but it's a different way to coordinate all of these machines as opposed to RustDesk. So I code for the most part in VS Code, and it has a really nice remote tunneling feature. So you can have one computer with one installation of VS Code remote tunneled to other machines that have VS Code installed. And obviously it does it better than the iPad. You can actually do it on the iPad with VS Code in the web, but it's rubbish. I wouldn't do that. I would do it on a desktop. And this tiny little machine is perfectly capable of having my 10 or so windows of VS Code running all at once. So that's really nice. I can type to these machines with almost no latency, so it feels like I'm coding on my local machine, but I can coordinate all of these machines. And a really nice thing about having a separate mission control computer that isn't one of the powerful computers you're using to run these jobs is that they're independent. So let's say you need to restart this and update it. You can restart your daily driver and you interrupt 0 other work. So that's really nice. Sometimes I've installed Windows updates, I've restarted it, or I've had like random Windows glitches and I've had to restart it. And that fixes the issues without touching any of the work that is happening on the other computers. A tiny piece of advice, if anyone else has the same workflow as I do, who knows, maybe you do. If you have like 10 windows with VS Code running, Mac has a really nice keyboard shortcut, which is Command Backtick, that cycles through windows of the same app. You can get the same behavior on Windows by installing something called Window Switcher. So I'd highly recommend that if you have lots of windows open of any app actually, but it works really well for me with VS Code. But this machine can do more than just coordinate other computers. It's a perfectly capable machine in its own right, which brings us to real-world use case number 4. And this is, I use it as a little like Claude Code server kind of thing. So luckily you can have Claude Code installed natively on Windows now. Even if you couldn't, you could get WSL on this thing, Windows Subsystem for Linux, whatever. But I have Claudes running on this thing that do like daily tasks that I want them to do. For example, fetching and logging data that I want to do daily. That doesn't need a huge amount of compute. It doesn't need a lot of storage. And so these little Claudes can run on this thing. I have a Claude which I've given access to my Gmail through an MCP. And it helps me draft replies, it helps me filter through all of the rubbish that doesn't go to the spam folder. That's running on this thing, and it's so stable, like it's running for weeks with no issues. And the 5th use case that I found for this thing, because it's such a reliable daily driver, it's what's connected to my monitors as we speak, is using it for slicing and sending print jobs to 3D print. So slicing can be slow, but it doesn't need a top-of-the-line CPU. The CPU in here is a dark horse. Like, it's only 6 cores, but it's a modern AMD Ryzen CPU. It's incredibly capable, and so very capable for slicing. So that's what I've been using it for, and it does every one of those things incredibly well. Now, there's a lot that I haven't mentioned. It has a good GPU integrated onto the CPU. GMKTec say that it's capable of gaming. I'm not a huge gamer. You'll have to watch gaming channels for reviews of how well this performs when it comes to gaming. And maybe it can do the demanding things that I want from it. Like maybe it can simulate particles and fluids faster than my laptop. It probably can, but that's not what I'm using it for, and so that's not what I'm going to talk about. Now let's compare this thing to the Mac Mini. It's tiny, the Mac Mini is tiny, and I wanted to see how they compared. Now, I don't own a Mac Mini, but I have a Mac Studio at work that I use. so I can talk about the OS and the usage. But to compare the size with the Mac Mini, I've 3D printed this thing so we can compare it to the GMKTec M8. This is a 2-scale Mac Mini from MakerWorld. You can find it if you search MakerWorld for Scale Mac Mini. So when this Mac Mini came out, everyone was losing their minds. They said, oh, it's the smallest thing ever. How did they get it so small?
Oh, how do they do it? Apple. Yes, take my money, Apple.
And they started buying this thing because it's so tiny. But the M8 is smaller in both of these dimensions, but it's just a little bit thicker. So if you were impressed at the size of the Mac Mini, you will be equally or more impressed with the GMKTec M8. And the most remarkable thing about this size is the expandability. So we all know that Apple force you to pay obscene amounts of money for storage upgrades, and you can't change this later. But with the M8, I've said this before, but I'm going to stress it again. There's a second M.2 slot. So if you've bought it with a terabyte, you can buy a 4 terabyte drive or an 8 terabyte drive, put it into the second slot, and you've got 9 terabytes total just for the price of the SSD. We'll talk about pricing later and how it compares to Apple, but I can't get over that. That's so impressive to me. You could even take out the SSD it comes with, replace it with a second 8 terabyte SSD if you wanted to. You've just paid the price of the 8 terabyte NVMe SSD, and you've ended up with 16 terabytes in this tiny thing, even though you only spent a tiny amount of money on it. Now, a big part of this is pricing, so let's get into that versus Mac Mini. Now, I should caveat this by saying prices are liable to change, especially with the memory industry as it is, but this is just a snapshot in time of the prices at the time of filming. I have the M8 with 1 terabyte. If you want a Mac Mini with a terabyte, you're paying at least $999. This isn't upgradable, you can't swap it out, and it only has 1 gig Ethernet. It doesn't have Oculink. But the Mac does have an advantage in the ports, which is that it has more Thunderbolt USB-C. I don't believe the M8 has any Thunderbolt, but it's USB 4 on the front, which is very fast. On the other hand, the GMKTec M8 with 1 terabyte has a recommended price of $529.99. There's currently an offer, so it's going for $389.99. It's less than half the price of the Mac Mini for the same amount of storage. I'm not going to talk about the pricing of the 512 gig version of the M8. For some reason, at the time of filming, lower storage is more expensive. But let's talk about if you want to upgrade the storage. Let's say you want a Mac with 8 terabytes. That's the most that you can get in this Mac Mini. You have to shell out $3,799 just to get 8 terabytes. And this isn't upgradable, so you can never have more than 8 terabytes, and you can't do this after the fact, so you can't buy it with low storage and then upgrade later. On the other hand, if you had spent, let's say full price, $530 on the M8 with 1 terabyte, you could later buy an 8 terabyte SSD for whatever they're going for. At the time of filming, it's about $1,000, and you can put that in, and you don't just end up with 8 terabytes, you end up with 9 terabytes because you've still got the first drive. You can go with 2 4 terabyte drives if that's cheaper. You can add 2 terabytes now for a fraction of that, and then upgrade later if you want. So the M8 is much more affordable, obviously, but the really impressive thing about it for any given price is the expandability. Now, there's one place where the Mac Mini might win, depending on who you are, and that is that it's part of the Apple ecosystem. Now, you might see that as a positive, or you might see it as a huge negative. For me personally, I'm invested enough in the Apple ecosystem that I prefer a Mac. It works better with things like my iPhone and my iPad. One of my favorite things about using a Mac at work is that it's connected to the same Apple ID as my iPad, and so I can use the same mouse and keyboard to control my Mac and my iPad. I discovered this by accident. The mouse was just moving off the screen. This was my Mac's mouse and it just appeared on my iPad. It's magic. I wish I could do that here, but giving that up is a very small price to pay for the expandability, the price and the versatility of the M8. So let me tell you about my favorite and least favorite thing and then wrap up with my overall thoughts. I think you can guess what my favorite thing is because I've repeated it throughout this whole video. It's the fact that this tiny thing has a spare M.2 slot. It would be impressive enough if it had a normal M.2 that you can remove and upgrade down the line, but you don't have to do that. You can boot with the 1 terabyte that it comes with and then add as much as you want to the second M.2 slot. My least favorite thing is the power brick. It kind of detracts from this whole thing because it is like pretty much the same size as it. It's longer and thinner, but I wish it was more like the Mac Mini, which has an internal power brick, which means that the entire thing is that size, whereas here you have to hide both the mini PC and the power brick. Overall, this is an incredibly impressive machine, not just for the price and for the size, but it's incredibly capable of running lots of Windows, managing multiple other computers at the same time. And so it is now my daily driver PC that acts as my mission control that helps me coordinate all of my other work. And it's more than capable of daily PC use like sending emails and editing Word documents. If you're looking at this thing, I have zero hesitation recommending it for anyone looking for this tiny form factor PC that is more than capable of almost any day-to-day work. Hope you found this video useful. I'm trying to do more computer hardware reviews because I love computer hardware. I use a lot of hardware and I have a lot to say about it. So let me know in the comments what else you would like to see. Click here to learn about the 140 terabyte NAS that I use for Blender, and click here for a video that the algorithm thinks you'll enjoy. It's not because the brick is particularly brig,